Hi, I'm Kasara Dang.
I'm Karen Yang.
I'm Bella Denota.
I'm Olivia Henderson.
I'm Trey Menchaca.
And I'm Haley Stolp. And today we're going to be discussing Purdue Pharma's OxyContin scandal.
From the late 1990s to the early 2000s, the opioid epidemic skyrocketed. In Southwest Virginia, the number of opioid-related deaths rose 830% from 1997 to 2002. Purdue Pharma's OxyContin accounted for 63% of these opioid prescriptions. My team decided to research Purdue's actions and discovered that it was one of the greatest escalators of this opioid crisis. So today we'll be diving into Purdue's misleading, aggressive, and unethical marketing of OxyContin, and then go into what steps it can take to remedy these actions. We'll first start with the company history, dive into the problems and key players, and then evaluate its actions, legal impact, and consequences on others. Then we'll finally end with recommendations and a conclusion. First, let's start with Purdue Pharma's history. Purdue Pharma is a privately held pharmaceutical firm. It was founded in 1892 by doctors John Purdue Gray and George Bingham as Purdue Frederick Company. In 1952, it was acquired by brothers Arthur Raymond and Mortimer Sackler, with Mortimer and Raymond acting as the joint CEOs. Arthur Sackler was already the head of his own pharmaceutical advertising company, as well as a medical periodical journal. And the brothers were able to leverage Arthur's advertising influence and medical connections to easily market and sell their drugs. In the 1980s, Purdue found success with the painkiller MS-Contin, but its patent was set to expire in the late 1980s. So in 1996, Purdue released OxyContin, which was a much more potent form of the drug, so much so that Barry Meyer described it in his book Painkiller as a nuclear weapon in terms of narcotic firepower. And Purdue continued to aggressively market this drug throughout the 2000s. In 2007, Purdue Pharma faced its first legal settlement, which they were charged for misleading of OxyContin's addiction potential. This resulted in a $634 million settlement, one of the largest fines ever levied against a pharmaceutical firm. Since then, many lawsuits have followed, and in 2019, Purdue Pharma began its bankruptcy settlement. Now I'm going to pass it on to Haley to discuss just how this problem started.
In 1996, Purdue Pharma released OxyContin, a drug marketed to relieve non-cancer-related chronic pain. OxyContin quickly gained popularity, becoming the most abused drug in the United States by 2004. A huge reason that OxyContin became so popular was Purdue's misleading marketing. Through brochures for patients, literature for physicians, and their Partners Against Pain website, Purdue continually advertised that the risk of addiction of OxyContin was extremely low. They even told their sales representatives that the risk of addiction was less than 1%. However, the company's executives and affiliates were well aware that the risk of addiction was much higher. This meant that Purdue was in direct violation of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, which requires drug manufacturers to properly and accurately portray the effects of a drug. The act also requires that a company submit their promotional material to the FDA to be reviewed before releasing the material to the public. Purdue was also in direct violation of this segment in the act, as in 1988, they released 15,000 copies of an OxyContin informational video to physicians before submitting it to the FDA. Before OxyContin, Purdue had struggled with drug abuse with MS-Contin. Released in the late 1980s, MS-Contin quickly became the most abused drug in Cincinnati, Ohio. A huge difference between MS-Contin and OxyContin was that Purdue spent 6 to 12 times more marketing OxyContin than they had on marketing MS-Contin. Purdue's aggressive spending on marketing OxyContin helps explain the drug's widespread use, but was also highly unethical. Purdue incentivized their sales department to sell as many prescriptions as possible through high bonuses. The average annual bonus for a member of the sales department was $71,500, and it ranged all the way up to $240,000. Additionally, to help persuade doctors, Purdue spent $4.6 million annually to have OxyContin advertisements in medical journals, which are regarded as highly credible in the medical field. On top of that, Purdue sponsored over 20,000 pain-related educational programs through direct sponsorship or financial grants. Pain-related educational programs are meant to educate physicians on the drugs in the market for pain relief and the benefits and risks of these drugs. However, since Purdue sponsored a majority of these events, the content was biased, which resulted in a lot of physicians prescribing OxyContin. With Purdue's false and extensive advertisements in mind, OxyContin's widespread use and abuse comes at no surprise. Between 1997 to 2002, OxyContin prescriptions increased tenfold, from 670,000 prescriptions to 6,200,000 prescriptions. As a result of the increase in prescriptions combined with OxyContin's addictive nature, non-medical use of OxyContin skyrocketed from 1.9 million Americans in 2002 to 3.1 million Americans in 2004. Next up, we are going to discuss the key players in the OxyContin scandal.
Thank you, Haley. Now let's look at some of the key players behind Purdue Pharma's OxyContin scandal. First off, we have Arthur, Raymond, and Richard Sackler. So the Sacklers are responsible for building Purdue Pharma into the massive company that it became, but they did so by using misleading and aggressive marketing tactics, which continued throughout the sale of OxyContin. Next up, we have Michael Friedman, who is CEO, Dr. Paul D. Goldenheim, who was the company's top medical officer, and Howard Udell, who was the company's top lawyer. These three executives were charged with a misdemeanor misbranding charge in 2007 for knowingly falsely advertising OxyContin. Next up, we have Dr. Russell Portnoy. He was a doctor who, in the 80s and 90s, was responsible for the medical community's perception of using opioids. Before Dr. Russell Portnoy, opioids are rarely prescribed because doctors feared their addictive properties. But Dr. Portnoy was financially backed by Purdue Pharma and convinced the medical community that opioids were a safe and viable solution for pain management. Last up, we have Dr. Jacqueline Cleggett. She ran what's called a pill mill in Louisiana. So a pill mill is when a doctor basically loses their moral compass and hands out prescriptions for drugs, regardless of whether they need it or not, just because it helped them make a lot more money. And so she actually was the reason that Louisiana became a hotspot in the opioid epidemic. And she actually inspired a lot of other doctors who just wanted to make money. And those doctors were responsible for thousands of people getting addicted to OxyContin. And I'll hand it off to Kasara.
Hi, my name is Kasara Dang, and today I will be doing an evaluation of Purdue's actions prior to and during their current lawsuits. So first, as discussed by Haley, Purdue misrepresented OxyContin's properties and aggressively marketed the highly addictive drug. While Bella will be later discussing the effects on victims of addiction, I will be demonstrating why their marketing ploy of 12 hours is illegal. Secondly, I will be evaluating how and why the Sackler family and Purdue's actions to amend the situation were unethical. In short, they were funneling money into family accounts from the company and did not fully admit for their wrongdoings. The history of the drug is inextricably linked to the prescription drug epidemic. Massachusetts Senator Edward J. Markey, whose state was deeply affected by prescription drug abuse, called OxyContin a leading culprit in the current opioid and heroin overdose epidemic. Overall, states including New York have argued in their filings that OxyContin and opioids laid waste to hundreds of thousands of lives, depleted government resources, and effectively created a public health crisis. Purdue profited off billions off of OxyContin, as the drug accounted for 80% of their revenue and allowed them to join the ranks of industry giants. Forbes reported that the Sackler family was selling $1.6 billion of OxyContin annually by 2003. OxyContin would quickly become abused by addicts, leading to controversy and a decade of lawsuits against Purdue Pharma. In 2016 specifically, The Los Angeles Times ran an investigation based on thousands of confidential documents and records from Purdue and found critical information about their actions spanning from the 80s to 2011. And one of these primary actions against Purdue Pharma is the promotion and marketing of OxyContin in a way that enabled its subsequent abuse and addiction cycles. Purdue Pharma claimed that one dose would relieve 12 hours of pain, which is double the time of standard generic medication. And the drug didn't last this promised time. Patients began to feel withdrawal symptoms. Washington University School of Medicine neuropharmacologist and researcher on opioids' effects on the brain, Dr. Theodore J. Cicero, says that 12 hours of intervals of OxyContin would be the perfect recipe for addiction because of acute withdrawal stages, which would become a very powerful motivator for people to take more drugs. And OxyContin created these conditions for the opioid epidemic by establishing these cycles of pain and euphoria within patients, which fed addiction. And despite knowing that OxyContin did not offer the 12 hours of relief, the company still championed its claim to protect revenue and justify high prices. The Los Angeles Times investigation found that Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family were aware of the risk of OxyContin for decades, even prior to OxyContin entering the market. And despite they had concrete evidence of OxyContin's negative implications, they continued to insist it lasted 12 hours. And therefore, the drug dominated the market on this basis and allowed them to offer premium prices. But as a consequence, OxyContin's high availability is correlated with increased opioid abuse, diversion, and addiction throughout the entire nation. As you can see, as a result of their actions, over 2,600 cases were filed against Purdue. An overwhelming number of these trials were federal and state litigants representing thousands, if not millions, of citizens. And Purdue was uncooperative during these lawsuits. They successfully petitioned to have evidence sealed, citing the need to protect trade secrets. On top of that, their legal team made numerous attempts to get the cases dismissed. During this period, they also continued to market OxyContin as a 12-hour drug. While Olivia will discuss more aspects of the bankruptcy settlement, the filing is at the center of efforts to shield Purdue and its owners from the more than 2,600 lawsuits. The bankruptcy settlement does have much contention, and many states have not signed and do not plan to agree to the settlement. Secondly, the family has shown a lack of remorse for their actions. Though they claim to express deep compassion for the victims, they have found to be funneling Purdue money into family accounts. The New York Attorney General reported her office uncovered more than $1 billion from just one of 33 subpoenas. In conclusion, Purdue's actions were unethical because the company leaders acted with a self-serving bias. They consciously profit off of Purdue through the misrepresentations of OxyContin's properties. Moreover, they continue to funnel Purdue money into private accounts and have shown little remorse through their actions. Their actions prior to and during lawsuits were not only unethical, but they were illegal. Such actions demonstrate a complete disregard for the interest of the consumers and stakeholders. Next, Olivia will be discussing the consequences they faced as a result.
Purdue Pharma faced many consequences during the OxyContin scandal. This includes a large amount of legal consequences. Only a few years after OxyContin had been released, hundreds of their patients began suing Purdue Pharma. However, because of a legal doctrine claiming companies cannot be held liable when their products are prescribed by a physician, many of these lawsuits never made it to court. In 2004, the first public lawsuit was filed by the West Virginia Attorney General for overstating the duration of the drug's effects and for using deceptive marketing tactics to promote OxyContin. This lawsuit ended in a $10 million settlement and brought the Purdue scandal into the public eye. Purdue's manipulative marketing strategies remained and continued to harm more people. In 2007, the numerous lawsuits caught up with the company, and Purdue Pharma pled guilty in federal court to concealing the addictive potential of OxyContin. Purdue paid a total of $634 million in fines, and 3 of their top officials, including President Michael Friedman, top lawyer Howard Udell, and Chief Medical Officer Paul Goldman, pled guilty to misbranding a controlled substance and were fined $35 million collectively. This was one of the largest pharmaceutical settlements ever at the time. But the company continued to face more lawsuits, including one in 2007 against the state of Kentucky and another in 2017 against the city of Everett, Washington. By 2018, 16 of the 50 states had sued Purdue Pharma for downplaying the potential addiction of OxyContin. And by June of the following year, 48 of the 50 states had ongoing lawsuits with Purdue Pharma. In August of 2019, Purdue and the Sackler family began negotiations to settle over 2,600 lawsuits they were facing. The next month, they agreed to a $10 to $12 billion settlement and filed for bankruptcy just days after. Within the settlement, $4 billion would be used to provide drugs for people in cities, states, and counties that sued the company. Some of these drugs would even be used to help rescue people after they overdose. Furthermore, all profits made off of Purdue's drugs would go directly to the parties that agreed to the settlement. The Sackler family agreed to give up ownership of the company and to contribute $3 billion of their personal funds. Steve Miller, the chairman of Purdue's board of directors, said, "This settlement framework avoids wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on litigation and instead will provide billions of dollars and critical resources to communities across the country trying to cope with the opioid crisis." Although many states agreed to the settlement, some states refused the settlement and decided to pursue further legal action. Now, some of the other consequences that Purdue faced will be discussed by Bella Denota.
Overall, the reputation of Purdue Pharma is eternally tarnished, as the company is now associated with misleading marketing and the onset of the opioid epidemic in America. This reputation will be extremely difficult for the company to repair going forward. Additionally, following the settlement of over 2,000 lawsuits, the company filed for bankruptcy and transformed the company into a public benefit trust corporation. This payout serves as the company's attempt to reimburse state and local governments for the public health costs associated with the opioid epidemic. Overall, the impact of the opioid epidemic goes well beyond the corporate and legal consequences. Those primarily affected by Purdue Pharma's actions include victims of the opioid abuse problem and the employees who work for the company. Additionally, the actions of the company had tremendous financial impacts on the United States. Following the lawsuits, the company had a significant impact on employees working for the company. Over 25% of top-tier employees, which are employees that have highly coveted technical skills across the industry, quit their job at Purdue Pharma in order to work for another pharmaceutical company. Additionally, following the onset of the lawsuits, the company laid off a total of 380 people, which included half of the sales force. So the remaining 100 employees who worked for the sales force had to shift their sales strategy in order to focus on selling non-opioid products. Likewise, in order to compensate for this plunging morale, Purdue Pharma had to give a $35 million payout in employee bonuses in order to retain the existing employees. Additionally, those significantly impacted by Purdue Pharma's actions include the victims of the drug abuse. Victims have 4 primary impacts of their addiction, which include physical, psychological, recovery, and collateral. Physical impacts include the onset of addiction for many, including those who had previous experience with drug addiction, but in addition, those who never had experienced drug addiction in their lives. This is because OxyContin is labeled as a miracle drug, which relieves chronic pain, and it is also known to give a heroin-like euphoria. And this makes it one of the most highly abused drugs and results in a significant physical dependence. Likewise, the psychological impact of this is that patients develop a need for this drug, leading to cycles of pain and relief once they have access to the drug. This constant need for this drug to give the euphoria-like feeling leads patients to develop crime records that they never previously before engaged in, such as doctor shopping or prescription fraud. The recovery process associated with this addiction can cost families upwards $10,000 to $25,000 a year, which is significant, and it also results in a reduced income as many people have to take off time from work in order to get the help they need. In addition, a study that followed patients 12 years after they completed a successful drug recovery program showed that those addicted to prescription opioids that did not have a relapse within years 1 through 6 had a 19% chance of relapsing from years 7 to 12, showing that the risk of relapse is persistent throughout one's life and it is a lifelong struggle that there is no cure for. Additionally, there's significant collateral impact that victims have. Because people who suffer from opioid addiction often feel alone, hopeless, and out of control, many feel that there's a stigma surrounding their drug abuse and they're unable to talk about it in a public setting. This is largely because tactics used by Richard Sackler tried to frame the problem on the abuser instead of accepting guilt as the company, labeling abusers as reckless criminals. In addition, there's significant financial impact that the company has had on the economy of the United States. By taking in account excess healthcare costs, workplace costs, criminal justice costs, and fatality costs, economists estimate the annual cost of the opioid epidemic to be at least $504 billion, as shown by the graph in the column of 2015. The largest component of this is fatality costs, which make up 86% of the total estimated annual cost of the opioid epidemic. And these costs are the economic costs associated with death, which is calculated by multiplying a person's earnings every year times the amount of years cut off of their life because of drug addiction. Excluding fatality costs, the largest costs are excess healthcare costs, which take into account the average insurance claims that an individual suffering with opioid abuse has, criminal justice costs, which take into account the additional costs of police protection, correctional facilities, and legal fees, and workplace costs, which take into account the loss of productivity that every individual has when suffering with addiction. So from here, we will discuss how Purdue Pharma as a company should reimburse those impacted by the crisis and additionally repair their company reputation.
Like Bella and Olivia explained, the OxyContin scandal destroyed Purdue Pharma's reputation as a trusted pharmaceutical company, and it's still wrapped up into many legal battles today. Although the company has acknowledged its role in the crisis, it still maintains that it has taken every step to address it, meaning that it hasn't taken on an apologetic stance nor any actions to remedy its devastating impacts. As a result, we have 3 recommendations for Purdue Pharma. First is reparations towards the victims. The company must first take an apologetic stance towards the public. Both the Sackler family and the company should acknowledge that its misleading marketing and aggressive sales tactics led to thousands of opioid addictions for their own profit. Next, ongoing efforts to address the epidemic require substantial public funding that the budget lacks. As a result, the company should contribute money towards rehabilitation support and therapy programs. The second recommendation is transparency, both within the company and towards the public. They should end misleading marketing campaigns, which includes training sales representatives on true statistics and safe usage, as well as maintaining truthful and cautious advertising. They should also end manipulation of clinical trials to promote false statistics. Lastly, the company should support stricter regulations, which means cooperating with government efforts to implement stricter regulations to prevent overprescription of pain medications. They must also cease sponsorship of doctors, allowing to give professional, uninfluenced opinions in prescriptions. Lastly, they should also support pain-related educational campaigns that will teach doctors how to safely prescribe pain medications.
Thank you, Karen. So to wrap things up, since 1996, 146,200 Americans have died from opioid-related overdoses. However, the amount of pain undergone by the friends and families of those afflicted by opioid addiction is incalculable. In addition, the economic implications of such an epidemic are catastrophic towards the United States national economy. Purdue Pharma is a prime example of the necessity of stringent national regulations on drug promotion and prescription. Thus, the company should work to repair the damage it inflicted on victims, clients, and the government, as well as undergo a shift towards transparency and stricter ethical standards. Thank you for watching.